Financial trauma can show up in so many different ways. These are just a few of the ways that I know about, some of which I've experienced myself. And the more you can be aware, the better. All right. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Financial Freedom Fastlane. You know the vibes. The quicker you get to your dream life, the longer you get to live it. And I'm your host, George Achimpong. As promised, we are coming back with a part two, of the last podcast episode, where I talked about how financial trauma had me getting a DUI over 12 years ago. Gotta throw that disclaimer out there because y'all be thinking I'm outside and acting crazy. No, this was over, I think, at this point. So 2011, and we're now in 2013. So yeah, quite a bit of time ago, about 12 years ago, at the very, very beginning of my financial services career. And it made me reflect on just what are some different aspects of financial trauma. Again, I am no expert on the topic of financial trauma by any shape, form, or fashion, but me being in the advisory space for over a decade, I definitely have an understanding of it. There's some great people in the space like Rakim Sabri, and even one of my lead advisors, Deja, who know a lot about financial trauma based upon like that being something they really wanted to zero in on as a part of their core expertise, right? But I'm gonna share a little bit about it from my lens and my perspective and what financial trauma is and some different ways that you can recognize if maybe you have financial trauma. All right, so one thing that you've heard me say is that I am on a mission to bridge the gap between limiting beliefs on what's possible and the oversimplification of success, right? And one aspect of financial trauma that I've seen to be true in people is having limiting beliefs on what success can really look like because they've only ever been exposed to poverty or people who don't make a lot of money, right? And as a result of that, your peer view or your belief system around what's possible is limited, right? It is limited because you have not been exposed up close and personal to success at a high level, right? You have been exposed to people who are just financially average. You have been exposed to poverty. And as a result of that, it is very hard for certain people to wrap their head around the idea of somebody being just really successful. So hearing someone say they make $100,000 a month evokes this emotion in you of impossibility, or like that is, they got to be scamming or they got to be doing something that's not right in order to be making that kind of money, right? That is a limiting belief, right? That means that there's something inside of you that makes you feel like that's not possible. And that is a form of financial trauma because it'll start to have you thinking about things the wrong way. It'll have you thinking about people the wrong way, all because you have a limited worldview on what's possible, right? So if you ever hear someone say like a number that feels big to you and evokes a non-positive emotion in you, that means that there's something associated with that level of success that your belief system can't wrap its head around. So here's a quick hack. Whenever like there's anything in life that is triggering, right, I think is the technical term, then that is an opportunity for growth, right? That's an opportunity to dig deeper, to figure out why did that scenario evoke that emotion in me? Don't just take it at face value like, oh, well, everybody probably feels this way when someone says they make $100,000 a month or $1 million in a month or $100,000 in a day, right? Because the truth of the matter is, when I used to hear those things, it seemed very far-fetched and unrealistic as well. Now, or at least I thought I didn't have a limiting belief on my own success, but the reality was I did and I didn't know it. But what helped me out is I was able to get exposed to it being done at a high level. And that was uncomfortable too, but it made it possible. It made it tangible. And that's why I was able to make the adjustment to achieve those levels of success, because I was able to see that it was possible, right? It was a part of someone else's reality. And I ultimately knew that I could make it a part of mine, right? So that is why it's so important to get connected to the right people, get in the right ecosystems, find people that you can learn to trust who have achieved certain things so that it can shift your belief system. Because if you don't believe it to be true, you can't obtain it. And that's not philosophical. Everything starts in your mind. So if you don't believe that making a certain amount of money is possible for you, you'll never find yourself in the environment where it's even possible, right? It just literally won't happen because it's like, oh, this is not even a real thing. Anything that you've ever wanted to achieve had to manifest in your mind first. It manifested in your mind first as a belief. You've ever had a dream and it felt so real and you woke up and it was just a dream, right? It's because that's how powerful the mind is. The mind is going to manifest something first up there. And then ultimately you can start to exude the actions and behaviors that will give you the opportunity to make it tangible in real life. But if you don't even have the belief system that it's possible, then you'll never get there. So that's the aspect of financial trauma that we want to unpack, is the limiting beliefs around what's possible when it comes to being successful. All right. So another form of financial trauma is oversaving, being extremely frugal because of the fear of being broke again, right? A lot of us don't come from money. And so when you start to make a little bit, you might start to get afraid that like, oh, I never want to go. You ever heard somebody say, I never want to go back. I never want to go back there. I'll never go back there. And so your actions, right, start to create this artificial reality of like, man, I might go back there. So I'm not going to fully live my life and embrace my life. I'm going to be super frugal, not going to spend any money. I'm going to scrutinize every cent. And of course, we all should be good stewards over our financial resources, but not to the point where we are afraid to utilize those resources, right? Because what's the point of making money if you can't even leverage some of it to increase the quality of your life? And notice I said quality of life. I didn't say use the money to buy a Lambo or Ferrari or a $4 million home or whatever. I'm saying to simply increase the quality of your life, because if you're living extremely frugally, it's the one thing to be a good steward over your finances. But if you're living extremely frugally, that means that you're a couple steps away from living the life when you didn't really have the money. So what is the point of that? Yes, we want to be financially smart. Yes, we want to save. Yes, we want to invest, but we don't want to do it under the pretenses of fear of going back. One thing that really helped shift my paradigm, not just specifically with money, but with the actions and intentions that I make, is this paradigm around evidence versus emotion, right? You have this emotional feeling of not wanting to be back in that place, wherever that looks like for you, when you didn't have money, right? But you probably have a good amount of evidence that shows there's no reason for you to believe that you won't continue to make money, that you won't continue to be a person of value in the marketplace and continue to have opportunities to make more money. And even if you did lose your job, get laid off, or things slow down with business, that you possess the capabilities to continue to figure it out. You probably have more evidence that speaks to that than evidence or indications that you could end up back broke, right? So what is that healthy balance of being a good steward over my money, but not being so financially frugal that I don't spend any of it? All right, here is a big form of financial trauma, right? Here's a big one. Spending money so fast, loose, and frivolously, right? Because you've never had it and you feel like you're honestly making up for lost time because you just never had money. So now you're trying to buy and spend money on all the stuff that you can now that you got it, right? That's a very popular, I would say, form of financial trauma, because if you don't come from money, it's probably stuff that you saw growing up, like, ooh, I want this, I want this, I want that. When I get money, I'm gonna do this. When I get money, I'm gonna do that, right? And so you start to develop this spending behavior. It's basically like, well, shoot, I'm making up for lost time, right? I got to spend as much of this money and buy as much of this stuff and do all the things that I never got a chance to do, right? you're vicariously living through yourself, right? It's like, man, I always wanted to do those things, and now I'm gonna make it happen, right? And then you end up on the other end of the spectrum of the person who was super frugal, right? You just jumped off the deep end. You're like, I'm just gonna swipe it, forget it. I'll mess up a check, I get it right back. It is what it is, right? So you got to be mindful of that, right? Because I know one of the ways that this kind of showed up for me early in my career was, so again, I worked in this environment where you eat what you kill, and there's ebbs and flows. One month I can make $19,000, one month I can make $19, right? When I first started. So what would happen was I would sometimes go through these periods where I wasn't making as much money, and I had to be a little more like frugal and tighten my belt so that when the money would come, I would then go like play catch up on all these things that I wanted to do. The problem with that is my income was not consistent. So when I was spending the money when it came in, right, I was not accounting for the low season, right? And one of the things in entrepreneurship is you got to keep your highs low and your lows high. What does that mean? If you're an entrepreneur and your business makes $20,000 that month, right? You, as an employee of the business, yes, you just so happen to own said business, you might pay yourself $5,000, right? The business made 15. You didn't make, I mean, the business made 20, right? You didn't make 20. So maybe you pay yourself $5,000 when you made the 20 so that you have the capital reserve so that there's a month where you only make 5, right? You still probably can afford to pay yourself the $5,000 because you kept your highs low. Right? You had high income. You didn't raise your expenses to be high too. You kept them low. Right? And when you had low income, right, you were able to still maintain and keep things on an even keel. You didn't pay yourself less. You were able to keep things copacetic because you planned for the fluctuations. So when it comes to this level of financial trauma, you just got to be mindful. Like, hey, look, like, I'm here now. I've arrived. I don't have to stuff it all through the window and make up for lost time, right? Like the money isn't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Let me spend the money like a sane and normal person. All right. So let's talk about the financial trauma that the previous episode was kind of anchored on, right? Now, this particular form of financial trauma was that when you start to make a decent amount of money, which you might feel like is a lot at the time, that you get to this level of financial invincibility. And so you start to make irrational decisions thinking that you can't be stopped, right? And we see this a lot with public figures, a lot with celebrities. Like, why? How could they be so rich and be so dumb, right? It's because they think nothing can happen to them. They think they can buy their way out of anything, right? They have so much financial resources, or at least a lot relative to what they previously had access to. And I genuinely believed that I could do what I want to do, right? And for me, the insult to injury was I had actual situations where I was able to do what I wanted to do, right? And as a result of that, I was making bad choices. And as a result of that, it led me to where it led me. And I'm so glad that it happened so early in my career, so that I could course correct and I could identify what that was and what that looked like when I was 23 years old versus me being 33 and, out here down bad, right? So making irrational decisions because you feel like nothing's going to happen to you and you can get your way out of anything, right? That is a form of financial trauma. All right. So the last form of financial trauma that I want to talk about today is working so hard, overworking. What Drake say? Working on the weekends like usual, just like really, really getting after it, like in a major way. Not because you just want to hustle and you got a dream and like you got ambitions, but because you are afraid, you are afraid that the money is going to leave. So again, one side of it is being extra frugal and never spending the money. Another side of it might be you are overworking yourself because you are trying to get as much money as you can. So that might even feed into the other financial trauma that I mentioned earlier, but getting as much money as you possibly can so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you don't have it because you are traumatized by your past. You're traumatized by moments where financial trauma was that, or excuse, where you didn't have money, and as a result, it created this trauma. And so now you're doing everything in your power that you believe to prevent you from having to experience that ever again. The challenge is now you're not enjoying your life because you're spending so much of your time working. And you probably feel guilty ever taking time off because you're like, well, shoot, like I just gotta go out and get it. I gotta hustle. Somebody's got to do it, and that somebody is me. That's a form of financial trauma, right? I understand that, though. I understand that from a lot of layers. I understand it from the lens of maybe you're the first person in your family to really start making it in a major way, and you feel this obligation, right? And so it's like, man, that's probably a whole nother financial trauma in itself, the financial trauma of the black tax, right? And having people who are dependent on your financial resources, or that you've taken ownership over wanting to take care of them, right? That can feed into the excessive work ethic, right? The black tax. It's a big one, right? So I got to probably informally and formally add it to the list, even though it wasn't something I was originally going to talk about, right? A lot of us are the ones for our family. And as a result of that, right, it puts this pressure, right? So maybe that's a financial trauma that you don't even really, I don't know, it's not like fully owned by you, right? Because of what you experience, what your family kind of put you through, or just not say put you through, but like just the reality of the circumstance, right? It created this trauma because it's like, well, shoot, somebody's got to do it. We ain't never had it. Now I'm getting it. Now I'm responsible. And the last kind of impromptu one that came to mind as well, as I was thinking about this, is the financial trauma of survivor's guilt or survivor's remorse, where you grew up in a certain way in a certain area and you're one of the few, quote unquote, who made it out, and you're wondering, like, why me? Why did I become the one that was successful? Why am I the one that, started making all the money, or whatever the case may be? And you feel a level of guilt associated with that reality when you look at some of your friends, some of your peers, some of the people you used to grow up with, like, what was so different about me? And then you start to have a financial behavior, right, of maybe giving away so much money or taking on these responsibilities for other people because you feel like you owe it to them. You feel like, well, I made it out, they should have too. They didn't. It's my responsibility. So financial trauma can show up in so many different ways. These are just a few of the ways that I know about, some of which I've experienced myself. And the more you can be aware, the better, right? I'm no, again, financial therapist in that regard, but some of the natural things that make sense is like start to document, right? Like document when you have certain emotions that are evoked, or if someone even calls it to your attention, instead of being defensive, like sit with it, think about it, think about what might be, where it might have originally stemmed from. And then at least now you're at least equipped with the awareness on how you want to put guardrails in place to address it, right? Another thing you have to do is you have to give yourself grace in the process, right? Like, again, especially if you're one of the first people in your family who's ever had the opportunity to have a certain level of access to financial resources or wealth, right? That you're all learning. This is on the job training. So, give yourself grace, right? Give yourself grace as you navigate through this journey. So you want to document, right, things, journal, understand what your triggers are. You want to take that information to now develop a level of self-awareness around things that you got to be mindful of that could even be triggering for you, and how to put safeguards in place. And then give yourself some grace, right? Give yourself some grace as you navigate through this journey of financial trauma, right? Guys, I hope this episode was helpful for you. I hope that this is going to help you do some reflection and identify what areas of your life might you be experiencing some level of financial trauma, and then take some of the things that you learned or some of the things that you're realizing to develop a plan to help you navigate your financial trauma. All right. Until next time, remember, freedom is for sale if you're willing to pay the price.